So welcome to this webinar, which is going to be slightly different to the previous webinars that I've shared with you. This one is event management skills, and I'm Neil Wilkins, and I'm going to take you on a little journey. I'm going to tell you some stories about an event that, for me, really probably taught me more about what to do and what not to do, and I'm going to share some of those bits too, a little bit of vulnerability coming into this particular webinar, than probably every other event, workshop, team day, away day, everything else in terms of events that I've ever managed. The thing that I'm going to share with you as we go through this little storytelling is something called Click 24, and I'm particularly proud of Click 24. It was something I founded about 15, 16 years ago now, and have run this for 10 years. And so it hit its 10th anniversary before going into retirement. And it is Europe's first, and as far as I'm aware, only charity 24-hour mountain bike event. Okay, let that bit settle in just for a moment. Charity 24-hour mountain bike event. And formerly known as Click 24, on behalf of the charity Click Sergeant, who basically support children who have cancer and leukemia. And that's kind of really where the whole idea came from. So I had twin daughters, well, I have twin daughters, and right back in the day, they were very, very young, and my wife and I was sort of talking about, how to kind of support the world very nicely, do a bit of charity, this, that, and the other. And I came up with this idea of actually doing something a little bit crazy, which was I was going to ride my bike for 24 hours along with some friends and see whether we could raise a little bit of money. And of course, having young children at the time, it was like, well, what children's charities are there around? And a locally based one, Click Sergeant, in Bristol in the UK, was the one that we selected. And I and 32 other riders, most of them I knew, they were kind of family and friends and people who I was riding with, basically rode our bikes for around about 24 hours. And this was fondly remembered simply as Click. We're going to ride Click. And Click 24 was then basically born. And it became a lot bigger, a lot more significant. And in the end, after 10 years of running this on an annual basis, we, and I say we, this is everybody involved in the event, had raised around about £250,000 for Click Sergeant. So we became quite significant in terms of their fundraising. And that is something that I'm going to be forever grateful to everybody who was ever involved in the event. And so me as kind of founder and event manager, you'd think I'd be sat there taking all the glory and thinking, oh, wasn't it amazing what I did? It really was absolutely nothing to do with me. It was to do with everybody else who was involved. And so that's the journey I'm going to take you on as we go through this kind of exploration, really, of kind of actually how it all kind of materialized, how it all became something. Okay, so I had this idea, sort of back in the day, of doing this thing for charity. And I guess as a marketer, at the back of my mind, I had this idea that, well, wouldn't it be nice if this could be something I could grow? I could play with my marketing skills and see whether I could actually grow this thing. It grew from being something that was a group of friends really riding their bikes for a weekend for charity into something that eventually, we had 500 riders. I always topped it out at 500 riders, and I'll explain why in a moment. But 500 riders plus their support crews, plus, so we had 1,000 or so people in a field. That was kind of the festival or event field. And it became something that was quite different, if you like, in terms of the mountain bike calendar. And I had a vision for this thing that I didn't want to replicate everything else that was going on. The mountain bike scene in the UK is big. It's seriously big. The whole cycling scene in the UK is absolutely huge. And so what I didn't want to do is just replicate a lot of other events. There were other 24-hour events, but they weren't charity events. There are other mountain bike races, but this wasn't a mountain bike race. What I wanted to create, and I had a little vision for this really, was a cross really between a mountain bike race and, well, let's call it a village fete. So I wanted this thing to kind of resonate with the beneficiaries, i.e. the children who were going to be benefiting from this thing if by chance it was going to become a success. So I kind of created this model that it was halfway mountain bike race and halfway village fete. So it had this kind of real family feel to it, but it was a little bit dangerous and it was a little bit kind of test your endurance. And so I had this kind of sub message that kind of would run underneath Click 24 as a brand. And the sub message was, it's the toughest 24-hour course. So, if you're going to do this thing, you've got to be committed. Yes, you might have this ambition to do a charity mountain bike ride or whatever, but this isn't like the others. This isn't something that's easy. So I was kind of setting a little bit of a tough expectation, both on me, the rest of the organisers, and obviously the riders who are taking part in it. So this wasn't going to be something that was the same as everything else. So my vision was to create something a little bit different. So I'll explain how that kind of emerged as far as the kind of event management side of things, which obviously we're here to kind of talk about skills that you kind of probably need or skills that you can develop when you begin to manage events. So the first thing for me was to get a very clear vision, crystal clear, almost kind of laser sharp, so that becomes the kind of the guiding light, the North Star, if you like, for every decision that as an event manager you have to take. And believe me, there are decisions that I'm going to talk to you about that I had no idea were coming. I hadn't planned for them. I had no skills to manage some of these decisions. But as an event manager, you've got to do this stuff. Okay. So underneath the vision is your mission, if you like, and this is kind of the journey that as an event manager you're setting out upon. These are each of the steps that you're going to take, and I would describe this as literally holding the vision. You're responsible to hold the vision for the event. And for me, within something that was as significant as putting on an event like this, it was about living it and breathing it. And we're talking living and breathing it for months on end in the run-up, and then obviously the post-event stuff where there's all the press kind of work and all the marketing and the follow-up and the donation and all this kind of stuff happens afterwards. But certainly holding the vision in the run-in, so the living and breathing of how this thing is going to manifest in this field and on this 10-mile course over this particular weekend, with people coming from overseas. It wasn't just UK riders. People were coming from overseas to be part of this event. So there's a heck of a responsibility that goes into this thing. Pressure is on. You have a vision like this, you've got to be committed to the mission. And somebody once said to me, actually, it was a good friend who was running a mountain bike race not too far away from this, a little bit later in the calendar. And he would often say that, if you don't wake up in the middle of the night thinking about your event, you don't care enough. And we would both kind of compare notes as we were kind of putting the event together. And sure enough, that is what was happening. We were waking up in the night thinking, must note that down. And we'd have a little notepad. Both of us would kind of compare notes. And we actually both had little notepads next to the bed where if we woke up in the night, we would just make a little note, mustn't forget to do that. And things would just kind of come out of the woodwork, literally, of things that, even if you're really planful, and I am really, really planful, I try and, have no stone that isn't unturned. So I was kind of very, very planful, getting the timing, getting all the logistics and everything right. But you still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it because there are things that you are going to forget. Okay, it's just part and parcel of this stuff. So you have to accept that bit. But if you hold the mission and you live it and breathe it, and on the understanding that you and you alone, as the event manager, are 100% accountable for what happens. So yes, you can take the good stuff. Yes, you can enjoy the thing, but you're also accountable for the challenges, the issues, the problems, the complaints, and some of the dangerous sort of entity things that can actually happen if you're running, obviously, an extreme sport event. Now, if you're thinking about this kind of stuff from a sort of a work perspective, and you think, well, the kind of events I manage, aren't that extreme because they're, people coming into a room, maybe going off site to an event, or maybe it's a team building day or something like that. You are still accountable. Okay, there's a spectrum here in terms of running events. I'm talking here one that's probably a little bit further down the sort of the slightly more dangerous end of things, but you are still accountable. If you're the event manager, the buck stops with you. So that's an important thing really to remember as you go through this. So one of the early things I was kind of very mindful of, and again, being planful, being a marketer, I'm kind of aware of, some of these kind of planning models. So the first thing I would do, having got my vision and mission in place, is I would start to think, right, what are my goals? I need to be setting some goals here because I've got a charity who are kind of relying on me to deliver here. I've set this expectation that I've got all these people coming from all over the place and they're going to be raising charity donations from their efforts that they're going to be putting in here. So the pressure's on here. We're going to set some goals that are going to be meaningful. So the next thing I would suggest is being really, really key and really, really clear rather about your SMART goals. So make them really specific. Be really, really focused. Again, it's all about precision. Be sort of setting goals that are actually measurable. Don't set things that really aren't kind of measurable because you're always going to beat yourself up that you aren't actually going to achieve them. Make them attainable. Okay, sort of if I'd said, I want 1 million riders on my event, well, clearly that was never going to happen. So you've got to make sure these things are achievable and attainable. Make them realistic. You can produce stretch goals, absolutely, but make them kind of realistic with the context and the resources that you have available, and make them time bound as well. And the timing in event management, I'll come on to talk about because that is very, very critical. It's absolutely part of what your sort of task is as an event manager. So the key performance indicators, the things that kind of give you that little kind of sense check as to how you're working towards your goals in my event was that number one was to get everybody out alive. Okay, simple as that. That was my key performance indicator. This is an extreme sport, okay? It can be, and I'll give you an example of where that really came out loud and clear to me a little bit later. But if you're running an event like this, to get everybody safely through the event is your number one, above everything else, your number one key performance indicator. Okay, because if you lose somebody in an event like this, that will have a profound impact on absolutely everybody and everything going forward. So the key responsibility is to get everyone through the event safely and out alive. Okay, so it is at that kind of level, and I'm serious here. This is not something to be taken lightly. Riding a bike for 24 hours, if you're doing it solo or even as part of a team, is a physical endurance event. And so, of course, we would always have, first aiders. We had ambulances on site. But even that, as I'll tell you in a minute, wasn't necessarily always going to be enough. And another key performance indicator was to have fun. This is meant to be enjoyable. Yes, it's endurance. Yes, it's really, really tough. And some of the conditions that we actually ran this event through over the 10 years were pretty extreme. We had some pretty extreme weather coming in on one particular year, which I'll talk to you about. But it was all about having fun. So that despite the pain, despite the discomfort, despite, 23 hours in, everybody feeling like they just want to pack up and go home and sleep, you'd still try and have some fun with the pain, so you'd actually enjoy that. So those were two very key performance indicators that I set. So think about your events and kind of, what is it you want to get out of them? What will be a good kind of benchmark and a good indicator as you progress through the planning and through the actual event itself? What will kind of give you an indicator that things are kind of going to plan? Another SMART goal that I set was to allow 6 months for planning. Okay, so an event like this, I kind of created a template. 2 to 3 years in, I had a template that was pretty squeaky clean. It was pretty good. I have to say it would be something that I would say I could kind of roll out because I knew what I had to do, when I had to do it, who I had to call, favors I had to pull in, and I knew exactly when things were going to happen. But in the early days, first couple of years, I would say it took a full 6 months for planning. And then what I realized is, probably makes sense to add another 50% on, because you never have enough time. Okay, so whatever event you're planning on planning and whatever event you're planning on delivering, add an extra 50% of planning time on if you have that luxury, because you can never have enough time to do this stuff. Okay, that will give you enough, hours that are going to be disturbed or nights that are going to be disturbed of sleep to give you enough confidence that you have absolutely covered every single option. Okay, so 50% extra time than you're probably going to be imagining you're going to set. And then the other goal that I set myself as part of this thing to differentiate between all of the other events that were kind of on offer, if you like, to a particular rider. And again, if you're trying to bring people to a conference, for example, or to some kind of showcase or some kind of launch, this could be really relevant to you as just a little bit of a thought process here. Is I would always try each of the 10 years to give something that was a surprise, okay, a little bit of a hook that would kind of make this event slightly different to every other event, that would be memorable, that would be something that people would say, oh, you've really kind of thought about giving some real value, but some value that really means something. Okay, so here I was playing to the heart. The best little piece of extra value that I brought within Click24 as an event, based on all the feedback that I got, and of course I would always listen each year to find out what people were truly valuing. The best piece of value I got was that the most significant little hook that I got in there was to have hot showers. Okay, high quality hot showers, and bearing in mind this is something in the middle of nowhere. This is kind of in semi-wilderness. We're talking about way out in the middle of the countryside, based in this great big sort of festival event field, which has no power to it. It has no running water. It has no kind of services provided to it. So I was literally basically bringing in to this kind of empty field, if you like, this empty site, resources and facilities and logistics. And so the one that was the most significant, and I think this was because it was such a surprise to get this kind of a feature, and I know since doing this, a lot of other events have kind of replicated this idea because it just really, really caught on. So this is one I was actually quite proud of, which was to have hot showers in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere. And that to riders, 18 hours into, it's the middle of the night, 18 hours into the 24 hours riding, to just be able to have like 20 minutes off and just go and get off your bike, have something to eat, have a hot shower, and then get back on your bike and ride. That must have felt like absolute pure luxury. So figure out what little hook, what little surprise feature that people would, actually bring smiles to their faces. What could you do in your events? That is just one thing, by the way. It is just one thing. So if you're doing this on a regular basis, like this was an annual event, each year I had to come up with something new. So I'd be listening to what they would value and listening to kind of, all the different sort of inputs each year. I would do this kind of wrap-up event, a wrap-up kind of meeting and review. And from that, I'd try and figure out next year, what little surprise am I going to bring to them? And they loved it. So that's something I would really encourage you to think about. The next thing that was absolutely critical, and this really was really critical in running Click24 as an event over 10 years, was the relationship building with stakeholders. And with stakeholders, a stakeholder basically by definition is somebody who has a vested interest in the success of your event or your project. So the stakeholders here were very, very varied. There was obviously the charity themselves, and obviously they're a big stakeholder because they're going to sort of be taking all of the charitable donations. So I had to keep them sweet, make sure I got a lot of kind of support and profile and coverage. We were in their main calendar for the year in terms of promotional events, etc., etc. So they did a lot of good work. So there's a lot of relationship building there. So think about who is your main beneficiary of the event that you're managing. Next one that was really important is the crew. So who do you need around you to help support you? Now remember, your job title here, and the way I'm defining this is that you are the event manager. Okay, so I want to make that word really, really clear to you. You're the event manager. What you need is to have a crew around you. And this might be quite a dispersed crew. This might be people who are directly reporting to you, or it could be just favors from family and friends that you're just calling in. So you might just ask, your best mates to kind of be the crew or be the support for you. And maybe they're only giving you 20 minutes of their time, but they are part of your crew. So figure out who you need. Are there specialist skills you need? Are there particular time slots that you need to fill? Kind of who do you need? And do you also need a right-hand person? Somebody that if you were to come down with some disease or you were not able to do and fulfill your role, is there somebody else that could carry this event on for you? Because remember, the accountability, the ultimate responsibility ends with you. So the whole event can't fall down if you're not available. So who could you actually bring in to kind of be your backup? Because that is really important. And so I would like to give a huge shout out here to my wife, to Jim and to Dave, who were my big three supporters here for this event, because without them, this thing would never have happened. They were my core crew each year. And beyond that, there were a whole host of people, way too many to mention by name, but you know who you are. So thank you if you're ever listening to this particular webinar. Neighbours as well. So that we had a landowner, and I built a really strong relationship. So basically, where are you holding your event? You need to be getting a great relationship with whoever is kind of hosting the event in terms of the location. So this could be a building, it could be a conference centre. For me, it was a big field, and it was a huge field. You almost couldn't see the boundary lines of this field. It was that big, and it needed to be because we were taking up a lot of space. So the landowner, because this was for charity and because this was for such a great cause, and it wasn't a kind of this was again where I was playing on this whole thing about it was kind of half mountain bike race, half village fete. So there was a kind of a softness, a kind of a personality behind it. The landowner really bought into it. So figure out how you can build that relationship with the landowner or with the venue owner so that you can actually sort of have longevity, because again, that's important. You want to be invited back next year. So calling in that kind of favor, if you like, calling in that quality of that connection is really important. The riders and the support teams, figure out who your audience is. So I'm not going to be talking here today about event marketing, because I'm going to do a follow-up session in a couple of weeks' time about event marketing. This is just purely event management. But let's just assume that we got the right riders and their support teams. So we're talking probably the biggest amount I had in the field was probably 1,500 people once you counted all of the support crew as well as the individual riders who are going to be riding in the event. So that's a lot of people, and they are all stakeholders. So making sure the environment for them is absolutely on point. So making sure the facilities are as good as they could be so that it brings a smile to the person's face. Making sure that, the food and drink, and that is so critical at any event, the sustenance that these people are going to be enjoying, making sure that is absolutely top quality. I would always say, and this is no sort of disrespect to a burger van owner, but I would always say we don't have burger vans. We actually make the food there fresh on site. Okay, so I was kind of really upping the ante in terms of the quality of the food. Riding in a 24-hour event means that you have to have great sustenance. You've got to be eating the right food at the right time. So we always made sure that that was kind of really supported. Yes, we would have a bar for the support teams who want to have a little bit of an R&R at the end of the event and things. So we would cater for everybody, but it was just about that level of detail. Not just assuming that you can just get away with the bare minimum because it's cheaper. We would spend more money, we would invest in the quality because we knew that would bring the sustainability and the longevity to the event. The local media and the cycling media, they are definitely stakeholders. There was no way I could have run this event over 10 years and grown it as it grew without the support of the local media to get local support, local volunteers for stewarding around the course. The local primary school were amazing. The Parent Teachers Association at the local school provided for a number of years all of the stewards some 24 hours of, I think it was around about 12 stewarding points around the 10-mile course. And each of those was literally was stewarded on a 24-hour basis. So we had literally hundreds of people out on the course supporting the course and making sure that the right things are in the right place at the right time. And that would only have been possible through the local kind of partnerships that we were able to get, and that was through local media, as well as, of course, the cycling media. And I'll talk a lot more about that when I talk about the event marketing, because knowing how and where and when to be promoting your event, both before, also during, because of course we've all now got live video and social and everything that can really give that kind of showpiece of kind of what's going on in the moment in real time, but also after the event. A lot of events kind of feel that as soon as the event's over, that's it, kind of we'll wait now till next year. That is not the case. If you want to build longevity, you're having to see the event kind of almost go for a month or two after the event's finished. So figure out what the timeline is for your event that you're thinking about, because it will undoubtedly, if you want to make this sustainable, it'll go beyond the end of the event itself, the physical real-time event. So you've got to kind of work that out, and using the media, if you're doing promotions, to do roundups, press releases afterwards, figure out what is going to be relevant to you, because that's really important. Another really interesting one was the influencers. Each year, what I tried to do was to get some interesting characters, personalities, or kind of flagship people, if you like, to be associated with the event. Now, it may well be that if you're doing a conference, you're looking at particular speakers, and if you can get some good names, they have to be big names. Micro-influencers can be as significant to the audience as, a big name. So figure out who is going to be sort of really resonating with your target audience. So my audience were the riders and the support teams. And one of the years I had the world champion single speed mountain biker came along and rode, and so we used him, and he was very much in agreement. So it was Jeff Worlock at the time. He was, sort of a big name in single speed mountain biking, and so we had him along to kind of, real sort of be a flagship there for that year. A couple of other years, Ollie Beckinsale, the Olympian, sort of multi-Olympian as a mountain bike racer, he was very much an endorser and influencer for the event over a number of years. So thanks, Ollie, for the support that you showed as well, because that was so helpful to us as we grew in those kind of middle years of the 10 years. Others as well were sponsors. We made sure that the event was appropriately sponsored. We did get quite a lot of coverage from sponsorship, and it wasn't just for having banners around the site to dress it, to make it look like it was a really professionally managed site. It was also what those sponsors could bring. And so that was either they could bring sort of coverage and profile, so that could be media profile and association, but they could also bring product. So we would have product sponsors coming in. And one of the big sponsors that we had was Lunicycle. And Lumicycle are a bike light manufacturer based in the UK, and they provided over the 24 hours bike light charging facilities. So again, it's those little details. So the sponsors then could kind of almost provide service as part of the event. So thinking really carefully, who do you need to be bringing to the event? Who could you call in maybe as a favour if you've already got a connection, or is there an opportunity to open up a new connection with a sponsor who can provide service or product that will add value to your event? So there's something in it for them, but there's also something in it for you. So don't just take financial sponsorship here. If there's something that you can do to kind of really push that on and actually get some real relationship building going, that's a really key thing. Partners as well is a really important one. A lot of the logistics that we brought in, I talked about the hot showers, which were a real differentiator for this event. There were a lot of other services that we would bring in. We would bring in, the amount of crowd barriers to kind of dress the event site. I can't even remember how many we brought in. It was thousands of crowd barriers and the like. And all of those we we managed to source in partnership. So we had some riders who were actually riding in the event who had relationships with logistical companies who could provide these services. So they would call in favors. So your connections, what connections have they got? Can they call in favors? So you're calling in favors of people who are calling in favors. So stakeholders is so important. And also the suppliers who are going to be sort of literally supplying to your event. Are they the right suppliers? We would only use suppliers who would resonate with the event. So either they had a connection with ClickSargent or they had a connection with us, so that we made sure that there was a real kind of almost family thing building here. So it wasn't just we'd go for lowest cost supply, we would go for quality supply as well. So yes, we'd negotiate hard. We wanted to make a big profit so we could make a big donation to the charity. That was always in front of mind. That's one of our key performance indicators, but not doing it at the cost of the quality of supply. So that was really important to us. So it was about building the longevity of relationships with our stakeholders. So let's talk now a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts of kind of what actually happened. And what I would recommend, and one of the key learnings here, was very much about creating a control room. Okay, so this was a physical control room in a marquee. We actually put up a marquee within the marquee. So one of the years that we had a marquee, and I don't know how many tens of meters long it was, but it was a big marquee. And this was the kind of the overall kind of event hub, if you like. And within that, we set up a smaller marquee, which was the event control room. And for me, in terms of managing events, this has always been something that I've been really quite passionate about, is having a base for the event crew. And also as an event manager, I want to be able to identify with a specific location. It's almost as an event manager, it's almost your little kind of comfort blanket. But our little marquee was very much the crew's home. So they knew that was where they could come to if they needed to find something, if they needed to pick up a walkie-talkie because they were going out to steward on the site or on the course. And also having in the control room a minute-by-minute itinerary. Okay, so knowing and plotting, and this is what I'm talking about forensically planning out your timeline. So literally from the minute we arrived on the site on the days before to actually set the festival site up, we knew literally minute by minute who was arriving, when they were going to come, which entrance they were coming in from, who was going to meet and greet them, all the way through to the very, very final kind of gate closing right at the end when everybody had left the site. Literally minute by minute was planned out. So you could go to the control room and you could know who was going to be doing what and when. So you might not be operating an event that was at quite that same sort of scale, but just the principle of having a home for the crew and a home for you. And it might just be a little desk in the corner of the room if you're talking about an away day, but having somewhere where you know is the base for the event gives it a certain identity. Okay, everybody who's involved logistically from the venue. For me, it was all the crew's support. Everybody just knows where that hub is. And for me, that's a really important thing. So having a base for the event is critical. Second thing I would suggest as well is kind of never relying on the tech. Okay, so we were out in semi-wilderness, and a lot of the time the mobile phone signal would not work. Okay, so we had to always have a backup, a manual backup for everything. So we had a whole bank of walkie-talkies, just as an example here. We had, not everybody was literally screen-based, so we would make assumptions that we had to print everything out so that everybody had a physical copy of things. So we just knew that because we were out in semi-wilderness, we couldn't rely on there always being power. So what happens if a generator goes down? What happens if the control room generator goes down? We can't stop the event has to continue. So always having that contingency of kind of like a manual backup was absolutely critical. Another thing as well to know as the event manager is know your insurance policy inside out. Now, of course, with something like a mountain bike event, particularly an endurance event, you have to be very well insured. You do not know what is going on. So in the event control room, you make sure you have all of your policies, you have your health and safety, you've done due diligence on all of the kind of entry points. We had a one-way system going on for vehicle entry into the site. Obviously, the actual course itself was very, very well marked. Every single, just as a little point here, to ensure that we got the right insurance cover, every single one of the, I think it was something like about 150 marker points and signs actually on the 10-mile course. And every single one of those was geocoded. So if you basically, as a steward, said, oh, well, I'm at sign number 37 and I got a rider down, could you send the ambulance out? We knew exactly in that moment where that rider was. So the ambulance there, geocoded, could get straight to it. And that was all part of doing the due diligence around the course as part of the insurance commitments. So it's this kind of level of detail. Now, you might be sat there thinking, well, I'm never going to need to do that. But just think at the level of event you're doing. Are all the stones unturned? Have you really, truly uncovered everything that might happen? And also think about your event control room as well as the kind of the hub for what I would term 24/7 customer service. Because just because you want to have a little break doesn't necessarily mean that the person needing your assistance does too. Okay, so they might need you. So think about the timeliness of the support and responsiveness of the response that you need to be giving, because it might just be that you have to be operating on somebody else's timeline. Okay, so, but if you've got an event control room, somebody else can be looking after that and stewarding that whilst you're off doing something else. But by having it, at least you then have the opportunity to know where the base is, and everybody else does too. And what it'll allow you to do, once you've got that base, that control room, people can self-serve. What we always had was so we would count laps. So we would be doing timing as people went around. People would be curious as to kind of who's done the most laps and what's the average time per lap and things like this. So we would allow people to self-serve from the control room. So we'd have screens with all of the statistics in real time of everything that was going on. And that freed us up then to provide the face-to-face support. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you're running an event, is make sure that you have what I would define as open communications. Okay, now for me, that was about walking the site. So that was about, in this very big campsite, this very big kind of base site, if you like. So not necessarily always on the course, because that was a 10-mile loop. So it was very hard as an event manager to get out there multiple times. I did ride it a few times, but it wasn't going to be something I'd have the time to do. But I could walk the site. So I'd always recommend, it's a great thing as an event manager to be very visible. Okay, so get out there, meet the people who are attending your event, walk the site, talk to them, find out how things are going, and be really open and honest and vulnerable as to the challenges that you're facing, so that if they ask you for something, they'll get a sense of kind of the priority of their questioning. Okay. Keep on the mic. We had a big PA system that would basically keep everybody up to date with things, and I would be on that probably every 15 to 20 minutes, just giving little updates and just keeping everybody, informed as to what was going on. And because of the uncertainties of running an event over a 24-hour period, you have no idea 6 hours in, 12 hours in, 19 hours in, what is actually going to be going on. So keeping on the mic just keeps that kind of resonance, if you like, with the audience. And also, there was a constant reminder here, and I learned this from a very early on. I think it was year 2 of doing the event. I forgot to order rubbish skips. Okay, so people then had left on the event site, and bearing in mind this wasn't in those first sort of 2 or 3 years a particularly big event, but I can remember, and I had a camper van at the time, I can remember doing multiple runs around the field the day after everybody had left and gone home, picking up their rubbish, picking up bin bags, picking up old barbecues that had been left over, picking up old bits of food and stuff, and I thought, never, ever again will I do that. So what I did then is I gave constant reminders from that point onwards, please, this is a charity event, that everybody is volunteers here, please help them to help you, so please fill up the skips, they're over there. And I would make that really a constant reminder. So the learning I want to pass on to you there is that, if you've got particular things you want people to do, is call in favors from the attendees. Let them know that this is something that they need to take responsibility for to get the best out of the event. And people don't mind being reminded of stuff if it brings them value. And of course, having a lovely, clear, clean site to camp on and to enjoy as they go through the weekend in this example was really, really important. So figure out from your event, what is it that you need to be giving people constant reminders to do? The next thing I wanted to kind of just remind you about and remind myself about as I kind of tell this story about this event that I did over this period of 10 years was always to keep to budget. Okay, and two of the things that I learned from doing this event was that if you can do break even before the event begins, you can enjoy everything else from that point onwards. So what I did is I created a financial model that made sure that the riders who were riding in the event paid in a deposit to register for the event before they started obviously collecting their charitable money from their sponsors. I made sure that all of the riders had paid a deposit and that deposit covered setting the event up. And in the day, it varied between about 14 and 17,000 pounds to put this event on. So I had to make sure that I'd covered that in deposits. Okay, before the event begins. Because if I did that, then I knew that every single penny, every single dollar that was raised then would go to the charity. So I could then rest knowing that I'd broken even, nobody was going to be out of pocket, particularly me, and so that everybody could then enjoy it. And so one of the other things I did, and I've learned this very, very quickly, was to not do ticket sales on the gate on the event, because that is unpredictable. What happens if you have a weekend where the weather forecast is awful and there's no chance you're going to get people coming along to view and paying on the gate? You then could be down. If that was part of your budgeting, the reliance on ticket sales on the gate, well, then your budget's blown out of the water. So making sure everything is prepaid for, all the ticket sales happen before the event, and that there's a cut-off date as well. And again, I'll talk about this when we talk about the event marketing in a few weeks' time as the follow-on to this event management talk. But doing things that are predictable and making sure there's a cut-off so that you are covered is, again, another really important skill that I learned. And I would never do anything that has a variability in it when it comes to budget going forward. So that kind of helps you as an event manager to kind of make things as kind of expected as possible. But you always have to know and plan for the unexpected. Okay, and there were 5 big unexpected things that happened to me, which I'm going to tell you about. The first one was weather. Okay, so this event always used to happen in around May time. It was always kind of mid-May, so around about the 13th to the 15th of May. So it became part of a regular cycling calendar, so people kind of knew when it was. But because we were out in semi-wilderness, the weather at altitude could not necessarily serve us each year. And some years, one year in particular, 20 hours in, I had local landowners, I had the AOMB ranger, it's like the park ranger, come along to talk to me about this, and they said the course is absolutely waterlogged. There are kind of like lakes appearing, kind of going across the course. You need to cancel the event, you need to stop. And I took the decision at that time that, okay, well, we're 20 hours into a 24-hour event. I think the damage is already done. And so then had to negotiate with the landowners that we could actually keep the event going for the next 4 hours, but that we would then put in place, as a kind of a trade-off for that, we would put in place a program of course and sort of land maintenance. And so a significant number of riders then volunteered afterwards through that summer to put the course back to its original state. So it's kind of figuring out how you can on the fly deal with things, and it's all about negotiation. It's all about looking for a win-win situation. Second plan for the unexpected was one year I decided to run the event, which was a charity ride. Okay, so for insurance purposes, it wasn't a race, but I decided one year to actually run it as a race. And that brings on a whole new set of challenges and set of sort of things that you might not expect, and they would have what is called a commissaire. Okay, and this is British Cycling's answer to a regulator. Okay, so the commissaire would be on your shoulder throughout the whole of the weekend. And bearing in mind, this is a 24-hour event. You have somebody shadowing you for the whole event, making sure you're saying the right things, doing the right stuff, making sure that you've put the right sign in the right place, facing in the right direction, down to that level of detail for a whole weekend. I had no idea it was going to be that intense. I decided the year after that actually we're going to return to having this as a mountain bike ride rather than a mountain bike race. You've got to adapt. But a commissaire was a good learning for me of how to really micromanage or not, and actually how that feels. Another year, we found that part of the event site where we were actually based was thanks to the park ranger, who came in about 3 hours into the event actually starting, asking me to move. Must have been about 40 or 50 riders and their tents and their vehicles and their support crew, because I hadn't been told that we were actually pitching tents over and above some historic Roman remains. How do you actually tell people who might be 10 miles away from you on a course riding at the start of a 24-hour event that, oh, look, guys, I'm sorry, you're actually on the event, you've already started, but I'm going to have to ask you to get off your bikes and stop and go and unpack, pack up your tent, pack up your vehicle, and move to probably now what is a far less favourable point in the campsite to actually keep this park ranger happy. So what do? You try and look for a win-win. So fortunately, one or two hadn't actually started the ride at that point, so we got them to move, and that was fine. The others, I managed to negotiate, hadn't actually put their tent pegs into the ground as far as the park ranger wanted them to go, or didn't want them to go, so we were slightly in the clear. We were only kind of scuffing, if you like, the top surface of the land. So he kindly and eventually backed down. But who would have thought that, antiquities and Roman remains would have impacted on a 24-hour mountain bike race? Planning for the unexpected. You can never know what's going to happen. Each year as well, we used to have music as part of the event, and I've used the word festival. It was kind of like a little festival within the event. So we would try and make it a little bit like Coachella, a little bit like Glastonbury, and kind of have this kind of little kind of mini music event, mini music festival within the event itself. So on the Friday night and the Saturday night, the support crews could really enjoy some live music and stuff. And that was me having a little play with being sort of Michael Eavis for a weekend, and just having a little bit of fun. But as soon as you introduce rock stars into the mix, you've just introduced some variables, and each year, yes, I would be very, very after one year when the band, which will go nameless, I'm not going to name and shame them, but they will know who they are, absolutely trashed the facilities that we provided for them in true rock star style, and we didn't make as much charitable profit that year. I decided then it would only be that we would use musicians from that point onwards that we actually knew or that came with references. So the event, the little festival within the festival, became something slightly different. But again, trying to plan for the unexpected. Probably could have guessed that might have happened when you bring some rock stars into the mix, but it's a charity event, for goodness sake. It's a family event. Would you have expected them to trash the site? Well, they did. Anyway, so planning for the unexpected. The final one I just want to talk to you about as well was one that really very, very much made me very, very happy for the forensic nature with which I was doing the pre-planning. I did mention to you a few moments ago about the real kind of complexity of numbering each and every sign around the 10-mile course and geocoding it. Well, one year we had one unfortunate rider who actually came off really quite nastily from his bike on a particular section of the course, and I got this emergency call. back to the control room and was told basically he is in a pretty bad way. The emergency ambulance went out from the site to meet him, and then I got a call from them saying we can't move him. He's in a really bad way. And so this was the one and only time that the event actually had to call the air ambulance. And so we had to do an emergency airlift from the course. And it was, do you stop the race? Do you stop the riders from actually going? What do you do? How do you plan for something like that? Well, of course, the first main priority is the safety of that particular rider. Unfortunately, then handing over that responsibility to the emergency services. And thank you guys, because yes, we seriously couldn't have done that without you. But then taking on the knock-on effect for the next 6 hours as people were asking questions. How was he? What did we do? Were we covered? Were we insured? What should they do? Of course, everything then sort of kicks off. So always having an emergency backup plan, I would say, for anything that could happen was my key learning. It doesn't necessarily make it that you're then completely paranoid about running an event. And I'm not trying to put you off here. All I'm saying is that if you want to take the responsibility to have the ultimate accountability for being sued for the very worst thing that could possibly happen, then you have to be ready. So it's really important. And it is only over as an event, and I really understood this, that it's only over when everyone has got out alive. Okay, now again, you might sort of set a different key performance indicator, but for me, that was the key thing. As long as everybody had got out, everybody was safe, then the charitable donations could come in, and that was great. And that really was the icing on the cake. And I used to do, just as a little bit of a self-meditation in many ways, is I would do what I would always call the ghost lap. So this 10-mile course that the riders were going around, at the end of the event, after everybody had literally gone home, the site was clear, everything had been sort of wrapped up, I would go around personally and ride the course, and it would be literally like a ghost lap. You could feel the riders who had gone around literally thousands and thousands of miles worth of laps. Because if you can imagine 500 riders riding over 24 hours around a course of 10 miles long, yes, they would do enough miles that would actually be the equivalent of getting from the Earth to the moon. I kid you not, we calculated it one year. They'd actually ridden to the moon. They hadn't made it back, but they'd ridden to the moon. But I used to do the ghost lap, and the ghost lap was the lap where everybody'd gone, no more riders, really silent. But the one thing, and the reason why I called it was the ghost lap, was I was picking up all the signage that would be around the course to make sure everything was clear and gone, so the landowners would be happy. But the thing that was always left to me was the energy that was left behind. And you could sense it, you could almost feel it and taste it. So I used to, in some ways, love, but really, really not look forward to doing the ghost lap because of that feeling of, satisfaction that you'd got it, that you'd done it, that you'd finished it. But on the same time, that real kind of, it's gone, it's finished for another year. So what I'd always recommend, a final thing I want to recommend, is that you sleep before you do any post-event reviews. Because if I'd reviewed how it felt, being absolutely shattered after probably 3 days without any kind of sleep, at that kind of level of adrenaline flow and commitment, you are tired beyond tired. And so don't do your post-event review straight after the event. Sleep on it. So for me, it was going home, eating as much as I could physically get inside me to get those calories back. And I wasn't even riding most of the years. So I knew how the riders were feeling at that point. But it was about sleeping on it. So leaving it for a day or two before really kind of reviewing and feeling how it feels. Do I want to do this again next year? How did this actually go? And so not doing it on a reactive basis, but doing it with quality. So when you come to do your kind of event reviews, that's something I would say is a really, really important thing. So just to sum up my little journey of Click 24, the 24-hour mountain bike event that I'm very, very proudly telling you the story about, and that we raised £250,000 for Click Sergeant. Well, I say we, it wasn't really me. Everybody else did the hard work. I just put the thing on. And that is genuinely how it felt, and that's how I think it will always feel to me. I was so grateful to everybody who rode and supported it. But the key things, the key sort of 8 things that I learned was that, first of all, set a memorable name, something that can be shortened so people can fondly own it. Okay, this was called Click 24, and yet people used to call it, I'm going to go and ride the Click. I'm going to go on the Click course. It just became the Click. And so when you do an event, to really kind of get people buying into it, make sure they can remember it in a simple little way that they will remember for themselves. Have a laser sharp vision. Make sure that you know very, very clearly what it is, but also importantly, what it isn't. Make sure your event really kind of does what it says on the tin, but that it doesn't overpromise. And live and breathe your mission. Once you've found what your vision is and what you want this thing to look and feel like, figure out a way that you can take the journey and really own it. 100% accountability is yours here for this thing. Set some smart goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely, and know how those things look and feel whilst you're making progress towards them. So what we call key performance indicators. Make sure those things kind of really resonate for you. Plan to a level of forensic detail. Do not leave any stone unturned. This is the key to successful event management. You need to try and preempt everything positively and negatively that may or may not happen. And if most of the stuff doesn't happen, great. Your life has been easier, but you were covered anyway, just in case it did. And always have a low-tech backup. If you're relying on a big, glamorous, full plasma screen to do big presentations at a great big conference, what happens if that goes down? What happens if you cannot get that thing to work? What happens if you can't get mobile coverage? What are you going to do? So always having a low-tech backup that will still allow you to run your event. Absolutely critical. Obsess about your ROI, your return on investment. Always make sure you know how much you're spending and what's going to come back. And as much as you can protect the variables in that, protect them. And that was my thing about not tickets on the gate and making sure all my costs were covered before the event, because then I could sleep easy knowing that at least that bit is done. Absolutely fall in love with your stakeholders. They are the lifeblood of your event. Without them, you don't have an event. Without them, it's just you and a dream. Okay, so love your stakeholders and figure out in the broadest sense who they are. And even if they're very, very distant, friends of friends of friends, if they can add value to what it is you're trying to achieve with your event, you've stand a chance then of actually making it a success. And make sure that those relationships with the stakeholders can be sustainable, because you want a legacy. You want them to remember your event and remember you. So if and when you want to come back and do it again, they're going to then say, oh yes, let's do it again. And the final thing I think probably is just to remember the job title. Learn to delegate. You are the event manager. You cannot do it all. Yes, you can own all of these things and you can facilitate all these things, but you do need a crew, even if it is one other person or just a friendly face or a friendly voice to help you if it's a small event. You do need to learn to delegate. You can't achieve everything. And the main reason is you can't be in all places at once. Okay, so you need a backup. You need to be replaceable. You need to almost, delegate your way out of needing to have a job at all. And that, to me, would have been the ultimate, is if I could have had a full team doing absolutely everything, then I could have ridden a little bit more. I could have walked the site a little bit more. And maybe, just maybe, it would have been even better than it was. It was absolutely amazing. But one of the things I did learn is that it was all about the people. So no matter what I defined the event as, no matter how many logistics and services and hot showers I brought to the event site, no matter how well I marketed it, it was all about the people. So event management ultimately is all about the people. It's not so much about the thing that you're doing. It's about a deep understanding of the people who you want and need to be involved in it.